Get out the vote. My name is Elaine Fisher, and I'm president of the Northwest Suburban AAUW branch. Remember the beginning of the Barbie movie where women were going to change the world and women had all the powerful positions and the whole Supreme Court was women? However, we also remember June 24th, 2022, when the U.S. Supreme Court took away the right to an abortion from 167 million U.S. women. Women rallied across the country on that Friday, including hundreds in Naperville and thousands in downtown Chicago and Washington, D.C. This led to slogans such as "Hear Us Roar in 24" and "Rovember." So now it is 2024, and we need to raise women's voices to influence who is elected and to determine the future of women's rights in the U.S. The question is, how do we moderate our anger when we talk to others about voting without demonizing the opposition candidates? One answer is the dignity index that we learned about at AAUW State Convention in April. We should try to treat others with dignity and respect as individuals. Another strategy for conversation is a truth sandwich. If you look at the image on the right, first discover or highlight common ground that most people would agree on. Then provide information that counters common disinformation without repeating the disinformation. And then end with your dream of a better future. You have an example. Our democracy is strongest when we trust in our systems and vote. When pundits so mistrust, ask why. Who is benefiting from questioning election outcomes? The winners or the losers or the voters? When truth tellers vote, democracy wins. You can learn more about this by Googling Truth Brigade. Another example, I know we all want an excellent education for our children. When books are banned or history is altered, our children are not being prepared well for the world that they will live in. I support candidates who support unbiased, excellent public education for all children. One of the most effective ways to counter disinformation is by talking to people you know, one-on-one, neighbor to neighbor. The web address on the screen is the advocacy action part of AAUW. You'll find resources there for a Get Out the Vote campaign. Voting is more than a civic duty. It's an expression of your voice, your values, and your vision for the future. We have many AAUW values that we can talk about. Freedom to read any book, access to unbiased education, equal rights, reproductive rights, voting rights. Also on that site, there are some do's and don'ts. We are a nonpartisan organization, so we cannot endorse candidates, but we can compare the candidates' positions on AAUW issues, which will make it pretty clear which candidates support our AAUW stance. We also can provide information about other endorsements by other groups or entities. In the web address at the bottom, you can go to the advocacy section of AAUW for voter education and voter guides. Here's an overview of the voter guide. You see there are 8 different issues, and each one of these can be expanded to provide more detail. And the voter guide can be downloaded. So if you're interested in doing a community meeting about our issues or interviewing a candidate, this can be very useful. Now here's an example of the head-to-head voter guide focused on the issues of education, economic security, and civil rights. The candidates are listed on the left column and the right column, and they're rated from support, mixed, oppose, or unknown. So this is an example for the U.S. Senate in Michigan. But on this same section of the website, you have templates for both the U.S. races and state races. So you could create a voter guide for whoever is running for office in your area. Now let's talk about how to get out the vote. Well, first you want to research candidates' stances on our AAUW issues. You could consider distributing voter information flyers, where to vote, where to register, where to get a mail-in ballot. You could make phone calls, write emails, send texts. You could talk to your friends, talk to your neighbors. Your action can help elect the candidates who will help us gain equity for women and girls. So how can they vote? Vote by mail, early voting. You want to know the dates and the locations in your area. And they need to know how to look up their polling place for November 5th on Election Day. And at the bottom of this slide, I have the web address for Suburban Cook County. You can still request a vote by mail ballot, but you need to hurry. Here are some important Illinois election dates. We've passed the last day to register to vote online, but you can still register when you go to a polling location in Illinois. Early voting is going on now, and October 31st is the last day to request a mail-in ballot. And November 4th, of course, is the last day of early voting. And Election Day is November 5th, and that's also the postmark deadline for mail-in ballots. Now, the other thing you want to look up is where your polling place is on Election Day. And so your source of this type of information is your county election webpage. And this example is the Suburban Cook County voting information. You can see all the things that you can look up on this page. And you notice the last one, my vote by mail ballot status. If you sign up for tracking, you can get an email letting you know that your vote by mail ballot first has been mailed to you. And second, when you send it back, they will let you know they've received it. And if everything's in order. In other words, if your signature matched or if there's a problem of any kind, you need to know that because you can what's called cure your ballot. In other words, resolve that problem. So the earlier you do all this, if you're voting by mail, the better. So further on providing voting information, here are some links that are useful beyond, Cook County. You can look up any Illinois polling location at this first web address. But for informing your neighbor maybe about early voting dates and locations, you will need to go to your county election webpage. Sample ballot lookup at Ballotpedia is one place. Election information from the League of Women Voters is another place that has a lot of information. So these are very useful web addresses because you definitely want to look at your sample ballot to see whether there are more than the candidates that you may have heard about. There might be referendums. And you definitely want to know about how many judges are going to be on your ballot. So here's one example of looking at a sample ballot at ballotpedia.org. You put in your address and you will get what's going to be on your particular ballot. And I used an address in Park Ridge for this example. So everyone in Illinois is going to see these 3 referendum that are listed first, these ballot measures. These are advisory referendums, so they are kind of like an opinion poll. And when you click on these little arrows to the right of each one, you will get more detailed information. So you'll want to go and look at these and read the details and determine, which way you want to vote. Then you see they start listing the different candidates for positions on the federal level, followed by the state level, and followed by judges. So there are judges that are running for office and there are judges that might be up for retention. So we remember how important judges are, especially for women's rights, since we're not in the Constitution. Many of our rights are determined in the courts. So ways to get to know your candidates are candidate forums, and those may have already happened, but they may have been recorded. So you want to look for those. The candidates all have generally websites with information about their positions. And you can check if they have endorsements listed on their website, who is endorsing them. You also can look at different organizations who rate different candidates, like related to gun safety or pro-choice or the ERA, reproductive rights, now endorsements. So all of these links are on the advocacy page of Northwest Suburban's website. So you can refer to that and go and check these various endorsement lists to see if your candidates appear on that list. Now back to the judges. Again, these are really important that you vote all the way to the bottom of the ballot, because that's where your judges are going to be listed. And the Bar Association does, the Illinois State Bar does ratings, and many other bar associations do ratings of judges. So you have the first one, Bar Association judge ratings. This compiles a couple of different ratings. The Check Your Judges is looking for injustice and rating judges related to that. The Illinois State Bar is very good for dividing things up by counties and covering all of Illinois. So all of these are very good resources so that you know which judges you want to vote for and which judges you might want to retain before you go to vote. And know this before you talk to your neighbors. Now, I mentioned referendums earlier. We've got those advisory referendums. In DuPage County, we have a forest preserve referendum, and many areas might have school bond referendums. District 64 in Park Ridge, Niles area, has this bond referendum. And one of the local organizations that's fairly new in the Park Ridge area is called Spotlight, Elevate, Engage. And they have an election guide which gives information about this referendum and also details about voting and locations to vote, etc.
If I could jump in for just a second, Elaine.
Well, and Mary Fontaine is the president of that group. Mary, go ahead.
A lot of the great information Elaine has outlined is actually in one of the three voting guides you'll find at the spotlightee.org website. There's a general election guide. There's one specifically to judges that talks about why there are so many people on the ballot and how you figure out quickly which ones you want to vote no on for the retention votes. And there's for those of you dealing with college students, there's a registration guide. Spotlight did endorse this referendum. You can read why in the election guide. Thank you.
Okay, great. Thank you, Mary. And we're going to pause briefly if there are questions about anything we've covered so far. We covered a lot of different resources, and just wanted to take a short pause. I see something in the chat. Okay. We've put Spotlight's link in the chat for you, anyone that's in that area, to make it easy. And I just want to reiterate. Go ahead.
I'm sorry. The guide also has resources for the city of Chicago, which doesn't like to consider itself part of Cook County. So it has all its own rules and websites and resources.
Right. And you notice, vote like your life depends on it. Unfortunately, that is true more today for women than it has ever been, well, for a long, long time. Way back it might have been, but we didn't have women dying from needing a DNC before. So let's go on. Here are some ideas for conversation starters, and you may want to add to this. You might say to your neighbor, "Are you planning to vote? Are you concerned, like I am, about the loss of reproductive rights for women? Are you worried about support for public schools? Has your family been affected by the increase in gun violence?" Any others that you think would be good openings? Well, we'll take time at the end as well. Here's kind of a summary of some of the issues that AAUW tracks and supports. I'm curious if you were to put a #1 priority on one of these issues, something that really motivates you to talk to fellow women or your neighbors. Everyone, I think, should be concerned about a lot of these. So put your #1 priority in the chat, and you can just put the number. Like if you are upset about censorship, put #3 in the chat. If you're concerned about pay equity and maybe paid medical and sick leave, put #7 in the chat. Access to voting, #8. Unbiased public education access, #2. I'm seeing a couple 2s. Freedom from sexual abuse or assault, #4. Freedom from domestic violence or gun violence is 5. Reproductive rights and LGBTQIA plus rights, #1. So let's see what's in the chat now. We've got a couple 2s, 1 and 8. Well, as you think about these issues, I think you might want to think about 2 or 3 that you think would resonate for a conversation with friends of yours or neighbors. If your neighbor has young children, you might want to talk about public education, freedom to read, uncensored libraries. So think about who you're going to talk to and the issue that you can really get excited about and talk to them about it and convince them to vote. So let's look at several of these issues. Looking at the image here, without access to reproductive freedom, there can be no equity. This really is a big issue for women to have bodily autonomy, to be able to plan your family, means that you also are able to plan a career or career advancement. If you are not able to do those things, it is definitely going to have a negative effect on economic security currently for you and your family and for your lifetime. And this image is from the AAUW website, if you're looking for that, for a flyer. Unbiased public education, we have been active on this about a year and a half ago, speaking out against book bans, private school vouchers, revised history, religious influences on curriculum. This is another big issue. Just a little break here. Thought-provoking. Civil rights and the rule of law, as we mentioned before, from the U.S. Supreme Court to the local district courts, we've seen the impact of judges on women's rights, on our everyday lives, and on the future lives of nieces and all young people, really. So this again emphasizes how our votes have a direct impact. By voting for judges, we have an impact on women's rights. Freedom from gun violence. I've gathered some data from Giffords. The #1 cause of death of children now is gun violence. And the rate of suicide has increased due to the use of guns, because it's a most effective way of killing yourself. Domestic violence, 1 in 4 women are victims. And if the abuser has access to a gun, it makes it 5 times more likely a woman will die. Gun violence kills 40,000 people a year. And in addition, total wound care costs $557 billion. Pay equity, a long-time issue for AAUW. You see the research report on the right, cumulative impact of sexual harassment on women's careers. Women resign from a job, or they transfer, or they change companies because of harassment in the workplace. Equal opportunity, salary transparency, Title IX, workplace fairness. Are there others we could list? Pay equity is, again, a big issue for women. Since women live longer than men, we really do need to have pay equity. And our voting rights. The Voting Rights Act of 1965 was a landmark achievement, but new voting restrictions will affect 27 states in 2024. And these new laws disproportionately impact minorities, women, youth, and people with disabilities. So this is definitely an issue we need to know where people stand. You might wonder what those restrictions are, and maybe you've heard about them. Reducing the amount of time for early voting, reducing the time for mail-in ballots, cutting back on the number of polling places, and requiring a photo ID in some cases. This might be a little message from the women of Kansas who voted the right to an abortion in their state constitution. Women's rights are human rights. Women are more than handmaidens who have babies. You can determine the future rights of women by who we elect. And the image at the bottom shows that this has been a long struggle from the Declaration of Sentiments in Seneca Falls Convention in 1848. They declared that all men and women are created equal. So, in summary, when we vote, we are fighting for our AAUW values by supporting candidates who support our issues. I hope we've covered enough detail on these issues that you can talk with your neighbors about the issues that are a priority for you and your family. So now we're asking you to commit by answering this question. What will you do? Provide a voting information flyer? Develop a candidate voter guide to share? Talk to 6 friends and neighbors? Volunteer to canvass? Volunteer to make phone calls? Kate, can you launch the poll? Click on the activities that you're willing to do, and you can choose more than one. And when everyone has voted, we'll share the results. So has everyone voted? So let's end the poll and share the results. Great. It looks like 60% are going to talk to friends and neighbors and volunteer to make phone calls to voters. And then we have developing a candidate guide, 20%, providing a voting information flyer. Great. So let's stop sharing and we hope that you're going to share your plans in the Public Policy Google group. And then when your plan is completed, share your success in the same group. And your branch public policy chair should be a member of the Google group already. But if you're not sure, or if you want to join the group, Karen Korch is on with us tonight and has provided her email for us. You can write to her to get into the group, and then you can share your results. Karen is one of our 2 state public policy co-chairs, and we thank her for being willing to do that. So ladies and gentlemen, let's march to the polls with friends and neighbors and raise our voices by voting to advocate for women's rights, women's equity, for women and their families, and elect the candidates that will support bodily autonomy and equity for women. Thank you all for your efforts, and we look forward to hearing your results in the Google group.